Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started. My name is Hamid Khan. I am an organizer here with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Welcome to our Surveillance 101 teaching, and this is part 4. I'm also joined by my co-host, Jamie Garcia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie. I'm also with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and I'm also a registered nurse.
Welcome. So we're going to get started. Just a quick snapshot of what has been going on. We started these Zoom webinars when COVID hit, basically in the middle of March. And the way the coalition has always operated, we are a grassroots community-based organization where our primary focus is to raise awareness, do knowledge exchange, build power, and with a goal to abolish the national security police state. Very simple goal in mind. And then we're based out of Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. So most of our work is really informed and guided by the experiences of our communities, which we have learned a lot. It's been very instructive based on people's lived experiences. So when COVID hit in March, we decided to continue with our every Tuesday evening meeting, which was happening all 4 Tuesdays of the month in person. But then, of course, as a result of just social distancing and other issues, we took on a virtual medium to reach out to folks. So this last Tuesday, we had our 23rd webinar. And each Tuesday is committed to a particular piece and particular issue that we talk about. The first Tuesday of the month is about surveillance and how it intersects with gender and sexuality. The second Tuesday of the month is committed to the war on youth. The third Tuesday of the month is more of a general political landscape, those conversations, and it's more a strategy session. And the fourth Tuesday of the month is also committed to data-driven policing, and that is a working meeting as well. So each one of them has been a working meeting too, where we have tasks to do. And then just community reaching out to us, we started doing these Surveillance 101 teach-ins about 2 months ago on every second and fourth Thursday. So this is our fourth Surveillance 101 teach-in, and where we cover some of the baseline stuff. Some of you, what we're going to speak about, may have been on this webinar before and may have learned some of these issues too. And then, so moving on to logistics, the way purpose is that when you all joined in, you were not able to unmute yourself, which we will later on when we have a collective conversation, because that's our hope that we are building together. And the reason is that we've had our little bit of share of Zoom bombing, where folks got on there and they try to disrupt and other things. Similarly, the chat is also open, but it's only open to be directed for questions and comments to go to the co-host and co-host, because also Zoom bombing happened through the chat room as well. So in a sense, trying to avoid any disruption and not give the haters and racists much of an opportunity on this site. So that's where we are. So please feel free to type in your comment. There's if you have a comment to make or a question, raise your hand or put it in the chat box, and myself and Jamie will be monitoring it. So with that, we will get started. But before we do, Jamie, any starting thoughts from you?
No, I think that this is hopefully will give us an opportunity to unmute, and that we'll be able to have a generative conversation where we can ask a lot of questions, especially if folks have been on our other webinars, where we can start to integrate different things that we're learning, because I think this space is more of a open learning space where it's a smaller crew of folks. Sometimes our webinars on Tuesdays are really big, and so it's a little more intimidating to talk, to kind of get to know each other more. So if you've been on the other webinars and you want to bring in other issues that you've seen in the other webinars, we have it on gender and sexuality, the war on youth, we've been bringing in issues around the budget, data-driven policing, location-based policing. So please feel free to see the connections because they're all there.
Excellent. Thank you. So maybe I'm thinking right now is that, how about this? How about if we unmute folks and folks allowing to unmute themselves. And if people can, if they're not going to be talking, please mute yourself. And I'm just going to open it up. Let's start off by, just sharing that when folks are like, first, what brought you to this teaching, and maybe a baseline question of when you hear about surveillance, what does it mean to you? I mean, just maybe if a couple folks wouldn't mind sharing their thoughts, that'll set a good tone to the conversation as well. So anybody.
Does everyone get the unmute prompt, or did that get like directed so we take turns?
Well, you just go ahead and unmute yourself. So you get to mute and unmute. We've opened it up with the understanding that please don't try to Zoom bomb this conversation.
Of course, thank you.
Please go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I went down like some Instagram rabbit holes, and then found hey, why don't I show? And then found the information for the event. So yeah, just interested to learn.
Nice.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other thought? Yes, Karen.
My name is Karen, and I'm in Champaign, Illinois, and I'm with the Independent Media Center here. And to me, surveillance is always abused. Like we had a store where the general manager was given access to a video camera and it was supposed to just be used for looking when there was a problem, to go and look at the video. But now he spends all of his days just glued to the video, watching the staff members, calling them out, saying that they're being lazy, and wasting his time. But that's not the way it was ever intended to be. It was only to be used when there was a problem, when someone, if someone came in and robbed the store, then to have a video of that. And so it's always, even under the best conditions, it's always, always, always abused. And so you never want to have surveillance as a regular accepted thing in a community if you want the community to actually to work well, because someone will always abuse that power. So that's why, and the police of all things are already abusing powers. So police surveilling on a regular basis really freaks me out.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I can share.
Please.
My name's Jamie, fellow Jamie, the proper spelling. I've been following Stop LAPD Spying's work for a bit now, and I've really admired it. I'm not sure if this is exactly what surveillance means to me, but something that has, I guess, what really made me really grossed out by the perverseness of surveillance is I learned about I think it's called the Safer Communities or Secure Communities program. And that's just to say that learning about how surveillance tactics are almost run as a trial with minority communities and disenfranchised communities that was really horrifying to me, because I feel like I've always had sort of a base understanding that there's overt surveillance of Americans by our police forces and our police state, but it was really horrifying to learn how marginalized communities are almost used as guinea pigs for larger surveillance programs. So I'm excited to learn more about that.
Great. So actually, the funny thing is that both of them are programs. So I put them in there. The SCI is the Safer City Initiative. And the other one is secure communities. SCI was a practice in policing called broken windows that goes back several decades, so 2 or 3 decades, that was unleashed in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles in the unhoused community. And secure communities was an immigration program for which led to mass deportations, just during Obama and Bush, and started during Bush and moved on and on and on. So definitely, thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts? Maybe one last comment from folks? Or Jamie, do you have any thoughts? Okay. Cool. Okay. So I think maybe to set the tone for the conversation as we move into stuff, I just wanted to kind of like, what is the news for the day kind of thing. So I just want to maybe bring in a couple things. So this was today or yesterday, the announcement that was made by the LAPD, and this is about how the LAPD in LA region announced the dozens of arrests of ongoing pursuits of suspects from the summer unrest, and in essence, part of that, what we're going to talk about today is about information sharing, and that how information gets shared, and then who all is a part of this program. So when the post the murder of George Floyd, when the rebellion and the uprising started, within about a week's time, the LAPD announced that they will be working with the FBI and other sort of like a multi-agency task force to gather information on from every venue they can. And particularly they talked about the CCTV, the closed circuit television on the streets, and for merchants as well. But one thing was also very interesting is that this piece where they talk about, where he says that I want to point out that many of these arrests are direct results of tips and leads in our community stepping forward, including demonstrators. So I want to highlight that, and I want us to sort of, park that for us as to what that really means and how it just really plays out. So, and again, I'm going to ask folks, if you're not, if you can keep your mic muted if you're not going to be speaking. The other news that I wanted to quickly share was this, where Palantir, and I don't know how many folks have heard of Palantir. This is as much a Darth Vader as it can get. Palantir is a data processing company that started back in about 2003, 2004, with a initial investment from the CIA, or the CIA's investment arm called In-Q-Tel, in partnership with Peter Thiel, who was the founder of PayPal. And this is Alex Karp, who's currently the CEO of Palantir. Peter Thiel was also on Donald Trump's transition team as well, and an avowed anti-immigrant, and avowed racist, and whatever you want to, whatever adjectives you want to use. He basically moved to LA because, as per him, Silicon Valley was not his community, and he has moved to LA. But what was interesting was about this piece that was quite phenomenal, that in the Securities and Exchange Commission filings for the IPO, Alex Karp has written basically a manifesto of their political manifesto, that why do they exist and why are they floating now and going public, and why they want to raise money. And it's one of the most unusual filings of any corporation that, at least people who are in the business have known, where it basically lays out that we are not a typical Silicon Valley, and we don't even get along with Silicon Valley people because they are liberals, they're this and that, and we are here to be at the service of, summing it up, basically service of white supremacy, service of basically just apple pie and the flag. So I don't know if we can talk about Chevrolet very much right now, given how Tesla is moving. So that's it. So I wanted to kind of ground that how these things, and Palantir and Jamie will talk more about it, literally has blood on its hand. Palantir is the most enabling company, which has led to mass, like thousands and thousands of deportations of undocumented folks. And we had a major fight against LAPD's predictive policing program, in which there was a program called Chronic Offender List, which is basically putting people in secret lists, which we won a lawsuit and were able to get a copy of that secret list as well. And Palantir was central to enabling this thing. So I just wanted folks to hold that thought as to where these things are going. And then what we have is a PowerPoint. And again, I'm going to have to ask people to excuse us, because if you have seen it before, it's always a good reminder and a good refresher. One of the first things that we want to lift is the depth of academic complicity. That when we talk about state violence, and we talk about state capitalism, and we talk about the national security police state, we always speak about corporations and the state itself. But one of the things that we tend to overlook at times is the academy and the role and the historic role of the academy, whether it's the eugenics, whether it's with the continuing racialized system, and whether it was providing legal language for people to be 3/5 human, whether it was creating laws that codified Jim Crow and segregation and slavery, whether it was so on and on and on, whether it was creating a justification for mass deportation. But here's something from an academic, this is back in the late 60s, early 70s, who was an advisor to the presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, who really talks about that the implication that lower class culture is pathological seems fully warranted. And rather than waste time and public money implementing policies based on the false notion that all men were created equal, better just to face facts and acknowledge the natural division that exists. Members of the lower classes should leave school in 9th grade to get a jump on a lifetime of manual labor. The minimum wage should be repealed to encourage employers to create more jobs for low-value labor, and the state should give intensive birth control guidance to incompetent poor, and the police should feel free to crack down on young, lower-class men. And I'm going to go through a couple slides and then stop and then have a conversation. And Jamie, please, at any time, just to chime in. So the work of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, we've been around for almost 10 years. It was coming together of several folks who historically, myself, I've been organizing in LA for about 30 to 35 years, and was always, particularly around police violence and race and racial issue and community organizing and workers' rights. So 10 years ago, some of us came together and started identifying and realizing that how counterterrorism and counterinsurgency tactics were increasingly becoming a part and parcel of local policing. What was happening on the borders of or the battlefronts of Iraq and Afghanistan were being very clearly incorporated into what we will call the daily law enforcement. And there was one program which we'll go through, suspicious activity reporting program, which started back in 2008 in LA, and now it's a national program all over the country, which was a counterterrorism and intelligence gathering program, became a daily routine for the LAPD. And many times surveillance, when I asked that question, for us, we really look at surveillance, spying, and infiltration in that same breath. Like it is something like it happens all the time. And in a mainstream way, typically surveillance is seen as an invasion of privacy. And absolutely it is. But for us, it was also crucial to take it beyond the scope of the invasion of privacy, because privacy also happens to be a very privileged space for many, and for many of our communities, especially being based out of Skid Row. Privacy and being people of color, being people of a particular national origin. I'm an immigrant from Pakistan. My name is Hamid Hussain Khan. I've been organizing around against the national security police state for decades now. So of course, privacy, to expect that privacy and to be that clean data it would be like a, in a sense would be a failure on my part. So to recognize that, so we basically started grounding our understanding of surveillance as the tip of the policing knife, where surveillance is the enforcement arm of white supremacy and the knife of white supremacy, policing. So surveillance is the tip of the policing. And in that, how race and poverty and suspect bodies are basically traced and tracked and monitored to be then contained and controlled and criminalized through the white gaze. So, and we will go through the history of surveillance as well. And some of the guiding principles that brought us together was like, that what we are talking about right now is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. This didn't start after 9/11. This didn't start with COINTELPRO. This didn't start with the NSA or Edward Snowden. This has a very long history going back, and we were able to identify and mark, go back at least 300 years. We actually, on our website, if you all go on www.stoplapdspying.org, you can type in the search bar the timeline of surveillance of the LAPD, and you can find a whole document, a PDF document that goes back to 1920s and lists the various times. Also, we have a list of that too. The other guiding value is the creation of the other. That there's always an enemy. There's always the other. There's always this justification. So which brings me back to this multi-task force that the LAPD just announced the arrest, that the creation of the other is the looters, the rioters, the people, and not really looking at that how people of all generations are out there screaming and demanding that this BS has to stop. This state violence has to stop. This police violence has to stop. But yet at the same time, the creation of the other is always there. And at the coalition, we also speak about in the historic trajectory of the multiple faces, how those faces have been culturally, politically, economically demonized to justify the control, demonized to justify containment, demonized to justify criminalization. So the face of the savage native, the face of the criminal black, the face of the illegal Latino, the face of the manipulative Asian, the face of the terrorist Muslim, the face of the deviant trans, right? And when it comes to gender and femme bodies, on and on and on. So this is also very much one of the way we use this lens in unpacking these things. Then our goal is to desensationalize the rhetoric of national security, because fear, and we're always at war. I mean, like, the formation of the United States goes back about 240 years, but yet at the same time, just when we look at it, the war at home has been waged for a much longer time, from the genocide of the natives to enslavement of the Africans, and then within that, how various layers have been. So they were always considered a threat to national security. They were always considered a threat to white privilege and seen through that white gaze. And lastly, but not lastly, but one of the other guiding principles being that our fight is really anchored in human rights, and the fight is to dismantle and not limited to constitutional or civil rights. And I'll stop after this slide. I want to go quickly through a history of policing and surveillance. So we've mapped out, we have talked to various scholars and kind of looked at and also looked at for several documentation as well. So this is not even scratching the surface, but these are just like we wanted to list. Like, again, this is not a moment in time. So when we talk about predictive policing today, well, driving while black has always been predictive policing. Flying as South Asian has always been predictive policing. So let's just keep on going back and see where it comes from. I don't know how many folks on this call have heard of lantern laws, and I want to honor the work of Professor Simone Brown, who teaches at UT Austin, and their book called Dark Matters, The History of Surveillance During Slavery. Lantern laws were laws back in New York in the early 1700s, 1706 or 1707, where if you were an enslaved body, and if you were out in public, you had to walk with a lantern in your hand, whether if you were an indigenous individual or a person of African descent, you had to walk with a lantern to self-identify yourself as a threat to the system as the other. So in a sense, you have to wear that otherness as well as you're out in public. Slave patrols, which a lot of times we identify and link the evolution and modern policing to slave patrols, particularly in the South. Then black codes. Or folks don't know, these were the codes that were established immediately in the aftermath of emancipation in the 1860s, late 60s. And the idea was to really create these codes, which are very much prevalent these days as well. If we look at them, particularly in Skid Row for 48 5611, 4118D, and various other things, how they're dealing with the homeless people. So Jim Crow, Red Squads. Red Squads were squads which basically was started by the Chicago Police Department in the aftermath of the Haymarket strike in 1886, if folks know that. Which led to the creation of May Day, which led to the creation of International Worker Solidarity Day. This was a strike that happened in Haymarket, and this is what we still, all of us, at least to some extent, have the privilege of. This was the fight for the 8-hour workday. So immediately in the aftermath of that, and there were some bombings during that, some of the anarchists were also executed and hung as well. But then the Chicago Police Department started this first covert intelligence gathering section, which then came to Philadelphia, New York, LA, and the rest is all history. Of course, the war on drugs and the various wars that go on, SWAT, aerial patrol, Weed and Seed. Weed and Seed is an interesting history as well. This was started by Bill Barr, who's the current Attorney General right now for Donald Trump. He used to be the Attorney General for Bush 1 in the late 80s. And in 1989, he launched this program called Weed and Seed, which has taken its own formation in various other things as well. Gang injunctions, a lot of youth, how their lives have been devastated as a result of that, stop and frisk, on and on and on. So I want to stop here for a second, take a pause, and see that, Jamie, first of all, if you have any thoughts, and then open it up to see that, if folks have any thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things around policing that I think is important for us to kind of take in is not only just the history, but how times change, every gain that communities make in kind of delegitimizing and exposing the violence of policing. Simultaneously, there's an adjustment and there's a reform or there's a reframing or kind of an institution of newer technology or newer kind of programs that claim to be more efficient, claim to be looking just for the bad guy, or even reframe who the bad guy is, And so I think when we look at policing, it's really important to identify those moments in time where they are using kind of like PR to reframe who they are. And I think that piece is really important because that's how the legitimacy of policing kind of continues. And if we think just back in the last, couple decades within Los Angeles, we'll see that right after the Watts Rebellion, they had the McCone Commission that came in and was addressing accountability, was addressing use of force, was addressing racial profiling. Then we had the King Rebellion and Rodney King Rebellion. And again, the Christopher Commission came in addressing accountability, addressing use of force, addressing racial profiling. And then we had, after that, we had the, during the Rampart scandals in LAPD, we had the consent decree where the DOJ had to come in and again address use of force, address racism, address accountability. And now we're in the current moment where we had these summers of rebellion as well. And now we have an advisory committee that's coming in to be the advisor to the police commission who advises the LAPD. And again, now is going to be reviewing LAPD tactics, accountability, staffing, data collection. And so it's like on and on, we're constantly in this kind of circular thing, which is almost like, I would like to say, like this domestic violence circle where we constantly feel like the abuser, promises, they claim they're not going to do something again, and we believe them. And the next thing you know, the violence is back again. We go back, we have this conversation, they say they're never going to do it again, and then we're back in the same circle. So I think those pieces, as we walk through history, is really important to see what promises they continue to make, what kind of reframing, what kind of, how do you say, like revisiting of policies, trainings they go through in order to not be as violent as they fundamentally are.
Any other thoughts, any questions, any comments up until now, particularly as we look at these timelines and kind of grounding ourselves in history as well?
Is there a book to read with like a comprehensive history of all of this? Is there like or is it just like your website with all the resources? Like, is there a book that I can?
Yeah, most definitely. So the Red Squads, particularly about Red Squads, there's a book is called Protectors of Privilege by Frank Donner, who had done extensive research on the Red Squads, definitely, and that's been a source for our information as well. There are other pieces too. And then, it's been other folks have written extensively as well. I know that William Christen has done work around counterinsurgency. I mean, his work where it's titled The Other Side of Coin, COIN, which is counterinsurgency. And hopefully one of these days we'll try and bring him on one of these conversations as well. So yeah, there's different sort of sources of information and books too. Whether I don't know, Jamie or other folks
Another book, Our Enemies in Blue, that's a really good one that takes you through the history and the professionalization of policing and the different ways that it started to kind of mirrored how it was being professionalized in London, and then how it started to professionalize itself in the United States, which is really important because as we kind of move through this, Hamid's going to speak a lot about intelligence-led policing, which is actually coming out of the Kent Constabulary in England, and there's there's definitely a clear relationship between how policing is establishing itself and kind of mirroring itself. There is what is his name? Who is that one that they always reference as being the father of the principles of policing? His name is he was kind of part of the colonization of Ireland.
Yeah, he was a prime minister as well.
I can't remember his name, but anyways, check out
Robert Peel, P-E-E-L.
Yeah, Robert
he
Peel.
was Bill Bratton's mentor. This dude was around in the 1800s and was part of continuing colonization of Ireland and experimenting a lot of policing. And I just want to correct myself. The name of the author is Christen William, not William Christen. Christen, K-R-I-S-T-I-N Williams. So yeah. Yes, Steve.
You brought up a couple of books. The one that I always reference to, and it's very, very specific to LA, I think it's remarkable, is City of Inmates. City of Inmates. Her last name is Lytle Hernandez, if memory serves me.
Lytle Hernandez. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And it goes right from the mission period in LA to modern eras. And it's the whole concept of not a moment in time, I think it clearly is expressed in that book. Very, very local. The same patterns. And she's a good author too. She makes it creative.
Right.
The other one that I find intriguing, there's a lot of things written on anti-racism. Unfortunately, they come from people that look like me. But the new Jim Code, if you have a background in technology and want to see that how obtrusive this intersectionality is between technology and racism, and again, a direct correlation to the surveillance issue, the new Jim Code is, I think, a good piece on it.
Michelle Alexander, yeah.
Yeah. But those are the two books that really pop up. And I think one of the lessons learned here, particularly as a white, suburbanite and all the benefits, is how pervasive this is. I don't think about it. My liberties are my own. I go along on my day-to-day. Other people don't have that. You already evoked it. This level of surveillance is going on to me right now. I'm oblivious to it. Other folks, it's much, much more oppressive because they act on it.
Mm-hmm.
They use it. So anyway, those are my comments. Thank you for this forum. This is excellent. You guys are great.
Thank you, and I appreciate your comment as well on as you were talking about the other tools is the nonprofits, that how the nonprofits have been so deeply complicit with the national security police state as well, and just so definitely. Any other comments or questions about where we are? Okay, so. Michelle, did you have a comment? Sorry. Okay, never mind. Let me just get back to this. Oops, maybe I have to, where was I? Oh yeah. So going up, can folks see that? Jamie, is it showing up
Yeah.
on the screen? ILP?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is what Jamie was talking about when it was specifically related to surveillance, that this is a tactic of policing that comes out of the Kent Constabulary in England back in the 70s, and it's called intelligence-led policing. Typically, policing and investigative policing, historically speaking, of course, now, just we're talking about in as Stephen was saying about white suburbias and other communities, which is a completely different style of policing in other communities. I mean, even up until recently in South Central Los Angeles, I don't know if people know that or not, that the LAPD was documenting individuals as no humans involved. I mean, NHI was absolutely a three-letter acronym that they would note in this is the official sort of their reporting that they would do that. But in a sense, it's typically supposed to be an investigative piece after the fact. If something has happened, they'll go and investigate and all of that. But now what it took was that in the late 70s, they started talking about that how can we preempt crime? What other ways that we can be observing people's behavior and surveil behavior and then bring all that information together? And I think what's really critical about this process is that the third big bullet, the process involves planning outcomes an agency wants to achieve. And I think this is a very critical issue, that how they would use this observation of behavior and then draw it out to criminalize somebody. And I think one of the most classic example is gang injunctions and gang databases. That how young people, as a result of creating certain standards, that if you're wearing this particular style of shorts, if you have a tattoo, or if you fit 3 out of the 12 established sort of like markers, and your behavior shows that you're possibly a gang member, and we're going to put you in the gang list, gang databases, and then mining that data, that knowing that who people talk to, who they are, everybody else becomes a part of criminalization as well. So it involves collection of information, processing information. Typically, that's what they state, and then disseminating the information into other agencies. This is a sort of what we have mapped out. Now, this is old. I have to say that it's about 5 years old. This is about 5 or 6 years ago when we were mapped this LAPD's, actually even before that, to LAPD's architecture surveillance. And I'll quickly go through some of them. We have some photos as well. So SAR is the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program that I talked about earlier, in which basically it is based upon behavioral surveillance and data mining. And the way, and we'll talk a little bit more in details about this program. The iWatch is the See Something, Say Something program, which is a companion program of SAR. The Intelligence Gathering Guidelines, ATIS, is the Anti-Terrorism Intelligence Section. And these intelligence gathering guidelines are basically established that LAPD can place an informant in a political organization based on a tip for 6 months. They don't need any probable cause or anything. Predictive policing, Trapwire, Stingray, dirt boxes. We'll go through those. We have some photos as well. But let's talk about the SAR program, so the Suspicious Activity Reporting. That in 2004, Congress passed a law. This was after the Patriot Act. And this is what led to immediately after the Department of Homeland Security was created. They passed a law called Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act, and in which the idea was, and it came on the heels of the 9/11 Commission report, and the main premise of the Commission report was that the events of 9/11 happened because agencies were not speaking to each other. People were not sharing information, dots were not being connected, so everybody needs to talk to each other. So they passed this law, and Congress passed this law, and in that they mandated the executive branch, the president, to create a massive information sharing environment in which information would move seamlessly between local agencies, federal agencies, regional agencies, public sector, private sector, and we'll show you a graph as to how that information moves as well. And so within that, the next phase was that, okay, we can identify known behaviors, we can identify known violations, but what about somebody who's thinking of doing something? So they started this Suspicious Activity Reporting Program. And this is how they define suspicious activity: observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning related to terrorism or their other criminal activity. Now, when you break it down, it's like I'm observing somebody's behavior, which indicates to me that somebody's thinking of doing something related to terrorism and criminal activity. Like, how would you then, this is as speculative as it can get. This is as meaningless and vague, completely vague as it can get, right? And this is what, if an officer observes this behavior, then they basically, this is what happens. And what are some of the behaviors? Taking photographs in public, using video cameras, using binoculars, drawing diagrams, taking notes, walking into an infrastructure and asking about hours of operation. These are all considered, while on one hand, they may be completely protected by the First Amendment, but they are still considered suspicious activity. So now somebody's watching that. I mean, and then if somebody's asking about what time do these places close, they are placed into a secret list. Now, this is going back to 2013. By that time, out of the 18,000 agencies, 14,200 had already adopted this program. 53 federal agencies were participating in that. Almost 300,000 local line of law enforcement were involved. The suspicious activity reporting program, and very much, and what's also interesting is that even if nothing was found on you, the LAPD still gets to keep that information for 30 years. So this is the intelligence gathering guidelines that I was talking about, that how they can place an informant, and they can also take on fictitious personas for online investigation, such as Facebook and all that, all based on a tip. So want to go back to this, Jamie? Do you have any comments or thoughts about something? Want to add something to it?
Yeah, I think one thing to think about, if we go back to the slide before that, Hamid, where they were speaking about, or just one more before that. One more before that. So where they talk about how suspicion is defined, I think one thing that's really important to remember about suspicious activity is that that definition was created by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And this was, this office brought all the intelligence agencies together under one umbrella, and this was part of the 2004 Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act. But what's so important about understanding how they basically kind of gave a language to suspicion, because suspicion is very, opaque, it's very subjective. But what they did was they gave an actual definition to saying, I see you, I think you're doing something, or no, I think you are thinking about doing something, and then now I'm going to move on that. And that really is the basis of like legitimizing driving while black, legitimizing, as, these others possibly doing something, because now it can just be based on reasonable indication, like a concern that someone has. And so we think about the operationalization of bias, of racism, of those types of kind of behaviors that we see inherent in law enforcement, right? But the other thing is that, so now this is kind of like a governing way that police are going to operate. Now we think about when we start talking about data analytics and we start talking about predicting any type of behavior, this kind of gives that like legitimization to law enforcement, that you can predict that someone's going to do something just based on a hunch, just based on your feeling, just based on a concern. So even though SAR, or suspicious activity reporting, is like an analog kind of way of collecting data where someone actually opens up a report, and maybe it's not facial recognition technology, maybe it's not some kind of biometric data that's collected, it's giving the foundation to say all these different, components of data can add up to me thinking that you're going to do something, because that's the proof. And so now they don't need, reasonable suspicion. They don't need a probable cause. They can move on just suspicion, because now suspicion has a definition. Now suspicion is all about a concern, nothing factual at all, which has always existed, but now they've kind of like put it into law.
Anybody else has a comment on this definition? I mean, does this make sense to anybody? I know we're screen sharing, but I mean, it is as bogus as it gets. So, okay, cool. So we'll just move right along. And what happens is that what happens is the way that the system works, that let's say, I'm out there taking a photograph somewhere, and an officer observes my behavior, they open up a file, a suspicious activity report. It goes to the watch commander, and within 24 hours, immediately, just a mere act of taking the photograph, the watch commander sends that file to LAPD's counter-terrorism Special Operation Bureau. From there, it is supposedly vetted to see if it has any nexus to terrorism and or criminal activity. And from there, it is sent to what are known as fusion centers, and we'll talk about those, which are the central hub and spoke systems of data collection and warehouses of intelligence gathering, basically mega spy centers. And from there, it's then further vetted, then given to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. We were able to, through a public records lawsuit, we were able to get some of these SARs out from the LAPD, from the Sheriff's Department, and one of them was also came out of the lawsuit, where there's, I mean, we have about 8 samples of about 1,800 of those. And some of the most absurdest thing that you will ever see, where there's one SAR, suspicious activity report, about 4 students from an art school in Brentwood out on a field trip, on a photography field trip. And next thing you know, they are stopped by the sheriffs, the information is taken, and then it is sent to the Joint Terrorism Task Force for further investigation. So that's where, excuse me, I have a bunch of kids in my neighbor's home, so they're just having a good time. You hear that screaming and all that, but it's good to hear kids having a good time. So these are just some of the other pieces for the architecture of surveillance. This is what a digital receiver technology looks like. You've heard of Stingray, this one, but the dirt box is more like a Stingray on steroid. These are basically phone catchers. These are used quite a bit on fixed wing airplanes and all that. So what they do is they mimic cell phone towers, and they trick your phone to receive all that information through this box to a remote site rather than going through your phone service provider. So all the information that is coming in from you into your phone, and this one, even if your phone is shut down, it can also gather all the information out of your phones as well, as information is moving through your phones. This is Stingray. A lot of folks have heard about this. This was used quite a bit during various marches and protests. And this is also, it mimics cell phone towers, and it basically gathers all the information. This is called Trapwire technology. It basically, this black box, if you're walking down the street, especially at night, through infrared and thermal imaging, your body image is picked up and through this box in real time, uploaded into databases and sent to the fusion centers. This is high definition camera. These are mostly installed on aerial surveillance. So helicopters, and now of course they're getting drones, and these are extremely, extremely sharp. They can pick up like from about 5,000 feet a candy wrapper. And they were used quite extensively during identifying people during Occupy movement in LA. This is a license plate reader. Now there are newer versions of that as well. This one gets about 1,000 hits a minute, and gathers your information. This is again where Palantir and Vigilant technology, which makes license plate reader and various things, intersect as well. You know, just in LA, for example, you know, they found these license plate readers at some of these malls in the UCI campus. A couple malls over there, South Coast Plaza, other places as well. A lot of information. These are the drones. This is the Dragonflyer X6 drone that the LAPD originally in 2014 had received from Seattle. And that's where immediately the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition launched the drone-free LAPD No Drones LA campaign, and we were able to keep these drones grounded for about 3.5 to 4 years. But then in late 2017, early 2018, they launched the drones again. Body cameras, we actually have put out extensive reports on body cameras, on drones, on suspicious activity reporting, on predictive policing. These are tools of surveillance, and which is also, you know, quite disappointing and interesting as well, that how under people's pain and trauma, how these companies capitalize. So body camera was a reform supposedly in 2015, 2016, post Michael Brown marches and Darrell Wilson's indictment, non-indictment and all of that stuff. So we know that how they are being used. This is called Freedom on the Move. This is basically a right used in Afghanistan and Iraq quite a bit. This has this thermal imaging and real-time facial recognition and biometric recognition as well. This thing kind of moves like almost like a submarine scope. But we took these pictures on a May Day march because we also have a project called Watch the Watchers, where we go out on the streets and document what law enforcement is doing. So again, want to stop there again for a second to see if folks have any questions or any comments or anything that you've heard is of interest up until now. And I want to be very clear that we are here to make power, build power, and not paranoia. So it's not about creating fear. It's about just, knowing our fight and knowing what all is out there. So any questions, any comments? Because there's a lot of information moving.
So if people use Signal, does that go through the DRT?
So Michelle, that's really the jury is out on that. I've heard technologists and say that yes, the dirt boxes can unencrypt stuff as well. Some say maybe not. So I think whenever people ask us, and so similarly with WhatsApp as well, that how secure are these tools? We always suggest that, let's be smart about, what we say, because social network analysis and a lot of this information is there. But tracking definitely can happen. Absolutely. I mean, there are other ways to track your phone and your location, and other ways to pick up the conversation. But Signal is I can't tell you like 100% whether Dirtbox can pick it up, but I've heard people talk about it who've done other research too. Karen, I'll take you back on the camera on top of the vehicle. So go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, on the Signal app, I'm an LO. That's probably my closest connection here.
Which is a legal observer.
Yeah, so it's a big deal to us. I think one of the ways to look at it is the concept of signals analysis. If you don't know Nate Silver and 438, then this is all what he's about. It's not so much what I say to you, Michelle, but the mere fact that I'm talking to you. So the signals analysis may still be intact, but they can't pick up on the character or the nature of the communication. I think that applies to the texting of Signal, but not necessarily the document sharing and everything else. Do you know what I mean by a Snowden phone? A Snowden modified phone, what you really have to go through. The thing only works when I plug in, not mine, but the Snowden phone only works when I plug in a hard speaker like this. The camera's been disabled, the speaker's been disabled, location things are marginally working on it, but that's how Snowden deals with it. He takes the phone apart and takes out the camera.
Right.
So maybe more information than Michelle asked for, but this is a mess. It's an absolute mess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? And Karen, I'll go back to that freedom on the move in a second. Okay, cool. Let me just get back to it. Jamie, any comments from you? Okay, let me just get back to it. Wait. Why are you doing that to me? Give me 1 second, folks. Having a little bit of technical difficulty over here. Okay, there you go. I'm going to try to bring that here. Okay. There you go. So I believe, Karen, you were talking about this one. This is what freedom on the move is. And that's basically how it moves and how it gathers information. So next we wanted to move into a way of how the information sharing environment works. And I think it's critical that we unpack some of these things, because where we want to take you is really to this piece. So this is what we have mapped out as the stalker state, that how information, so think of this Venn diagram. I mean, of course, it's on paper. It's a PDF document, the way it's drawn, but think of it as a very active, constantly intersecting circles, which are not just static, but information constantly moving between the public sector, private sector, law enforcement, this, that, and the other. So we wanted to bring something home that, for example, so we broke down DMV. We broke down the Department of Motor Vehicle and started talking about, like, okay, well, what are the ways that that information is shared? So here is an example of how information moves within the Department of Motor Vehicle. So in a sense, you're constantly being, your information is, so one of the ways I always talk about, appreciate Jamie talking about, is the datification of our bodies. That in a sense, that how our bodies are constantly spliced up into these molecular beings of data. And then how those data points are brought together for the recreation of our beings. Right, Jamie, am I capturing it correctly? Do you want to
Yeah,
talk about
I
that a
kind of
little bit?
say like it's the deaggregation of our stories of who we are, and then the reaggregation, right? Because everything, I mean, one of the biggest things I think we're challenged with when it comes to policing is that, you know, situations arise in our lives where we're in certain situations because of preceding events, because of, you know, happenstance, because we're just existing. And what ends up happening is that that moment, or who we are, we're never able to speak. We're never able to share that story. We're never able to be believed, or to understand the circumstances of what even brought us to a street corner, you know, whatever that is, you know, whether you're walking or, you know, whatever's happening. And what I think when we talk about the datification is that everything about that moment gets deaggregated into a data point, right? You know, who you are, where you live, you know, what kind of money you make, do you have a job, are you in school? And so instead of it being a comprehensive story that you have control over and that you are speaking, it becomes a data point. And then to speak about, you know, objectivity, that is where they feel objectivity is coming in, that they can reduce your life to certain data points and then bring it back together and have a more objective view of who you are.
Mm. And that which is now known as scientific objectivity. Thank you, Jamie. This is also just a breakdown of HUD as to how information moves within various systems, how we are constantly, you know, traced and tracked and monitored. This is the Health and Human Services, which again is going to get really, really, really critical as you know, this data collection and roadmap to recovery, supposedly from COVID, where now Palantir has an exclusive contract, and the program is called Protect, Health and HHS Protect, where our information is going to be gathered, and it's going to be processed, and it's going to be uploaded and kept in various databases as well. But what's interesting about that is that HIPAA, which we all assume that there's a right to a lot of privacy, particularly about our health, but when it comes to law enforcement agencies, and when it comes to national security exemptions, you know, HIPAA basically doesn't even apply. So a lot of these things, so it was critical for us to really break it down, to try to understand as to how this information moves, and where, and even to your point earlier, Stephen, that yes, on one hand, you know, people say because of white privilege and institutional privilege, or maybe class privilege, and also sometimes you hear people say we have nothing to hide, or it's those, absolutely, that's true. But yet at the same time, you are there to be spliced up into a gazillion data points which can be commodified. You are there to suck the last ounce of your resource for profit, where to then manipulate you, and it's almost like psychological warfare, in a sense. So when people say that, man, I don't know, I was looking at a pair of tennis shoes, and next thing you know, I got bombarded by a gazillion other sets of tennis shoes. So now, in a sense, that's exactly where this is going to be going. And I think one of the things that we also have to understand, that when we talk about body cameras, there's the Axon international company that used to be formerly Taser, who does a lot of information gathering and has cloud services for the millions of hours of body camera footage. They are now experimenting with that footage to go to the next level. And it's not about biometrics only. It's not about facial recognition. It's not about, as in the military, they call it identity domain systems. It's not about identifying you by the way you walk, through your gait or arm movement or your retina scan or the distance between your eyebrows, right? Now it's going down to that how they can predict mood. I mean, it's even going down to that's the kind of research that is being deployed as a result of that. So want to stop here again and see if folks have any comments about like the stalker state, the information sharing environment. Like, what do folks think about that? Any thoughts? Whoever
Hi
wants
there,
to.
this is Doggy Ploppy.
Uh-huh.
I have a question. With all this cross-sharing between these government agencies, what I mean, I'm a protester, and you know, I feel pretty helpless under the hostile eye of the LAPD and the federal government. I mean, is there anything that us protesters should be expecting from the federal government in terms of future prosecutions and stuff? Like, would it be from DHS? Would it be from I mean, I don't even know. You know, it's the OmniNet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess the question is,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm heading more towards like, what do we do for mitigation
Sure.
about this? And
Sure.
yeah.
Stephen, as a legal observer, do you have, I mean, I have some thoughts, but I've been speaking quite a bit about things, but I can also follow up because Doggy's question is really critical, but go ahead.
I can't talk about the activists, but I can talk very specifically what I relate to the LOs, particularly the new ones. Just the mere fact you put a green hat on your head, it is undoubtedly your face is somewhere cataloged in Washington, D.C. Okay, it just goes with the game. The persistence of the surveillance, you don't even need to see a camera. And if you're involved in this world, you are being surveilled. As far as mitigating efforts, I don't know of any except don't let the revolution stop. Keep it going. Because all these tools, all these things they're putting together, right now they're not turning on it, but they sure can, and it has happened in the past. We've had LOs pointed out. We've had LOs shot with rubber bullets. We've had articles in the New York Times and other Southern papers saying that we are such a liability. Just a mere fact that we're there. So no, this is a terrible climate. Don't let it stop.
Jamie, do you have any?
Yeah, that's all I have to add.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, do you have any thoughts?
You know, I think one of the things, you know, as far like legally mitigating these kind of factors are one thing, but I think that when we do go take the streets, when we are protesting, I think what's important is that we remember that there is all this technology that's out there. I mean, right now with the cases of LAPD and these multi-agencies that came together that are now swooping up protesters right now, I think it's important that we remember the closed circuit televisions, that we remember the Stingrays and the DRTs. And so this different equipment's out there so that we can adjust how we take space. One of the things that I've always been very kind of intrigued by is arts and culture, and how when we think about taking space, how creative we have to get when we take that space now, because we exist in a national security police state. So there is infiltration, so there is a watchful eye, and then there is this intent to kind of even control what the perception of you know, a legitimate protest should look like. So so for me, like, one of the things that has helped me so much is being very much aware of the technology being there, so that as I'm moving, I can identify it, I can see it, and I can protect myself in that instance from, you know, from a certain amount of it. But I think I do agree that we have to realize that part of the fight is knowing these things and making this kind of surveillance and stalker state and the architecture of surveillance very well known. That's part of the resistance, so that we can be fighting to get it dismantled, so that we can, you know, and one of the things that I thought about with what you were saying, Hamid, about how, you know, people say things like, I have nothing to hide. Well, it's, if you're saying that, you probably are not the target of it. It's people who are resisting. It's people who are within the Black community. It's people who are Indigenous. It's people who are people of color that are the ones who, you know, it doesn't matter if we have or don't have something to hide, the tools are being targeted against us. So our resistance to the existence of these tools, because they're violent, and organizing against these tools are how we start to mitigate this in our life. Because the more we expose them, the more like freaked out, you know, the police get. I mean, that's how we were able to dismantle Laser and Predpol, two predictive policing programs, because we exposed them and we demanded them to kind of come forward about what they are, and in the call to dismantle them, not in the call for them to be, you know, better managed or more transparency or to have oversight over these things. It was a straight call to dismantle them completely. And I think when we organize that way, when we are saying that, no, these are harmful, no, we don't want them, that is another layer of protection for us, because we are educating the community about them and the harms of them. And then one thing too is that when you are in different cases, say, you know, a case is brought against you, it is in discovery that you need to be asking, you know, your lawyers or whoever's representing you to find out what technology was used to actually bring a case against you, because then again, it exposes the technology. We had a certain individual at one point when we were in the Laser fight where this person was getting swept up on gang raids, and we demanded that the lawyer, we were like, you need to look in to see if he is a part of the person-based predictive policing program, chronic offenders. And the lawyer refused to. But later on, we found out that yes, this was the case with this person, that they were on the list. So had that lawyer took that initiative and just, you know, put it in for discovery to find out, that program would have been exposed. And the fact that that program, what we ended up doing was exposing the program to be very arbitrary, you know, could have helped in his case in some sense, who knows. But so those are the other things when you are, you know, when you happen to be on the other end where you are going up for trial or there is some kind of court case, it's really getting your lawyer to file for discovery to find out what tools they use to bring a case against you.
Thank you. Anybody else has any thoughts for the question that Doggy just raised? Any suggestions? Okay. I think one of the things I would also say is, Doggy, that this is a, obviously, you know, there's a lot of risks constantly involved, because what we have taken on is, we always talk about in our organizing world about being intersectional, but oppression and violence is so deeply intersectional, because there are so many tools available in the deployment of that, but yet at the same time, you know, call me old school or call me an OG or whatever, I still believe in people power. I think they can have all the power in the world, and all of this surveillance is absolutely as a result of the fear of uprisings, fear of people seeking justice, fear of toppling off statues and heads and crowns as well. So in that, you know, in that journey towards abolition, for us, it's really like, how do we make policing irrelevant in our lives over time in multi-generational ways? So for that, obviously, it comes with definitely its own risks as well. But having said that, as Jamie was saying, that there's definitely legal support out there available. And I would also suggest that if you ever get into that, don't let the lawyers run the whole gamut, because you got to be in control. Because if you leave everything up to the lawyers, you're not going to get very far.
Just to build on that, Hamid, we have a question that, how do we construct FOIAs to find out what technologies were used to gather data in case our lawyers won't do discovery?
How do we construct FOIAs for what? I'm sorry, Jamie.
To find out what technologies were used to gather data in case our lawyers won't do discovery.
Gotcha. So currently, it's the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition actually has a whole. So maybe I can just share some of that with you as well. That, for example, so this is. I want to just maybe let folks know that the work that we are doing over here as well. So this is an LAPD's portal. Through their technology. We filed this public records request on August 5th, 2020. We're right now going back and forth with them, and the goal is really, and this is, Jamie, can you see the PDF document?
Yeah, you can see
Okay.
it.
So this is what we filed, a very detailed public records request, asking them to provide us with all the information that all their tacticals. So starting on May 25th, on or about that, we're asking them to provide us with all communications and collaboration with the mayor's office related, all their communications collaboration with the city attorney's office, the LA County DA's office, all their communications with the federal authorities and other, agencies as well, all their communications with other local and state and local police agencies, which includes the Sheriff's Department, Highway Patrol, Beverly Hills, Long Beach, all their communication with campus-based policing, all their communication with the business improvement districts, with state and local public health, all the processing and transportation and release sites that they have, the deployment of the following units during this rebellion as well, whether which was the Major Crimes Division or Metro or SWAT or GED, Gang Enforcement Detail and Counterterrorism, any use of their local area fusion centers, crime and community intelligence centers, any collection and retention of photographs, videos, and audios, on and on and on, and it goes into any use of facial or biometric recognition, any use of phone location or tracking signatures, any use of the technologies, which would be Stingray, Freedom on the Move, dirt boxes, all of that, any aerial photography or anything. So as you can see, we have filed a very, very detailed any use of undercover planes. And of course, they're going to start, they're going to claim exemptions that, well, we can't tell you this. We can't tell you this. This is under privacy law. There's like, okay, well, fuck you. Like, we're standing here, we're coming after you. We want all the information. And to our credit, I would say, and to claim that, we have won 2 public records lawsuits. We were able to get a whole secret file out of them where they went on saying, like, it's a national security exemption. This is this exemption. We're like, okay, let's go to court. And we were able to get it. We're also asking about, just policing of even mutual aid or jail support and bail funds and other types of fundraising. We're asking for any guidance or policing going back to Standing Rock, that how those tactics were used, social media, any information they got from data brokers or third-party sources. For example, there's always willing and able people that, who are more loyal than the king. That's exactly what Michael Moore was talking about in that report that I shared at the top of this thing. How many people were ticketed? What is the overtime for officers that was being paid? All records and communication, blah, 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 which said BLM, LA Can, Stop LAPD Spying, on and on and on and on and on. So as you can tell, we have filed a very detailed public records request on this as well. So hopefully that may answer your question. And our goal really is that within the next 3 to 6 months, hopefully, keeping our fingers crossed, we have launched a whole archiving project where, our main website is stoplapdspying.org. But right now we are in the process of developing a Stop LAPD Spying archives.org as well, where everything, all these public record requests, all the documents that we get, all the documentation, everything that we have would be uploaded on that website, so it's easily accessible to the community. Because our goal is that how do we decolonize this knowledge and how do we make it available for the community? So, so the incident action plan, can you explain that, Stephen, what an incident action plan is? So the question is, if we are asking for incident action plans and for us, is that tactical operations at all?
Yeah, that absolutely is. The specificity of asking that incident action plan, that verbiage. But it would be, we have this incident, here's an incident commander, here's operations, all the players in it. It's been useful in the past. It's not something I don't think most people would necessarily even know to ask for.
Right.
But part of the deal is if they're a government, they're obligated to produce these kind of things. If they get federal funding, the Stafford Act says they have to follow certain protocols, okay?
Right.
And part of those protocols are establishing IAPs and the like. Now, it's not enforced, but it is something that you could pin your ears back a little bit, certainly on the specificity of who was that branch director at that particular time in that particular location. None of these guys like the civil liability or the personal accountability, and the IAP goes a long way in doing that. Who pulled the trigger on the tear gas? Those people should be clearly identified in that IAP by their role or their position. Yeah, and that's enough for me.
Thank you. Thank you. So any thoughts, any questions of what we are sharing? How does it sound to people? And we'll get back to where we were, but before I get in there, we just really want to make it interactive and more and conversational as well, so our communities are actively involved. Any thoughts on that? I know, Karen, that you had a question about the census data, which is something that, you know, that still a lot of folks are not very keen on that, where that census data would go. You know, although there's definitely been, you know, a lot of organizing and even threats of legal actions about maintaining the sanctity of the census data. You know, but definitely, you know, the abuse of census data, you know, just is more, I would say, political in nature as well, but yet at the same time, it provides information as well. It provides exact locations of people and communities too. So yeah, there's definitely vulnerabilities in that as well. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right, cool. Jamie, any thoughts up until now from you? Okay, excellent. So moving right along, I would just then, oops, yeah. So Jamie, is the Fusion Center piece showing up? No, it's
No,
not.
we're not
Sorry.
seeing it yet.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. I forgot to put it on screen share. Okay. So this is, I don't know how many folks have heard of Fusion Centers. Fusion Centers are these central hub and spoke systems of information gathering. So Doggy, to your point, and what Stephen was also saying, a lot of this information is gathered, and a lot of these agencies then send these information to these central spy centers, basically where information is gathered, information is stored, and information is shared as well. So fusion centers basically go back, although many years, but since 9/11, and then in the aftermath of the Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act and the creation of the information sharing environment that we shared with you, fusion centers became central to where a lot of this information is. There's about 80 plus fusion centers around the country. There are 6 in the state of California, and one of the largest ones is in East Los Angeles County in Norwalk. And this is fundamentally a spy center. We have had a couple actions over there, one in 2012 and the other one in early 2014. We're able to temporarily shut it down as well. But in a sense, it provides information. So everything, whether it's your health information. So now, for example, COVID-based information is all going to fusion centers, right? These are basically funded by joint funding between the state and Department of Homeland Security, and FBI and local agencies are the primary designated sort of governance of these fusion centers. So a lot of information goes in there into these areas. They basically collect information. This is, again, there were over 80 now. And then the reports are shared with more than 18,000 law enforcement agencies and FBI task force. This is just a location base of that as well. And these have been probably some of the most central pieces. And we have been looking at, so these are where the locations are. This is where there's one in Sacramento, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Orange County, San Diego. So basically they cover the 6 counties. Ventura, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, San Diego, and Riverside County. So that's where a lot of these informations are going in there. These are some of the reports which are all available on our website as well. This is one of the first reports that we had released in 2013 on the suspicious activity reporting program. So it's available. It really goes into details about fusion centers and a lot of stuff that we have talked about. This was another report that we published in late 2014 on body cameras. So this is also something very has a lot of information. This was a report on the drones that we had published in end of 2015. A huge, long fight against, and we're able to get the drones grounded. And even the original drones that LAPD got, because of community pressure, they had to destroy those drones as well. This is the most recent report we published in 2018 called Before the Bullet Hits the Body, Dismantling Predictive Policing in Los Angeles. But I just want to go back real quickly to an earlier slide which talks about, like we were talking about task forces, but a lot of times people think of task forces as federal agencies, federal and local programs. But task forces are very local. Jamie, do you want to talk about this particular one?
Sure. So there was a program that we ended up dismantling, Operation Laser, that worked in conjunction with the citywide nuisance abatement program, and this comes out of the city attorney's office. And so Laser essentially was kind of a component with how, and this is where we kind of go back to the datification of our lives, right? Where there needs to be data that's collected on a place, whether it's a business, a home, or an apartment complex, which basically says this area is a nuisance. There's been calls for service, there's been some kind of arrest there, there's been drug sales, there's been, you know, domestic violence calls. And so what LAPD's job is essentially is gathering that data, whether they gather it through informants, whether they gather it through, you know, just LAPD officers. And this information gets sent over to various people in the city attorney's office that works with this CNAP program. And so what they would do is they'd identify certain areas within locations that they would call laser zones. And laser zones, you can think about them like, you know, gang injunction areas, areas that LAPD said were high crime. It's kind of form of a hotspot policing. So within those areas, there were anchor points. And those were the areas that CNAP was basically looking at that area, trying to say, okay, we need to build a case against this area. LAPD, we need you to come in and establish the data for us to basically be able to move a case through the courts to remove the people from this property. And so the most famous CNAP case, at least currently, is when we think about Nipsey Hussle's Marathon Clothing. He was actually, not only were they harassing him through the CNAP program, but he was also identified through LAPD's Operation Laser program as being an anchor point. So, so that's an example of how LAPD, not only within, this is what we're mapping out in our data-driven working group, is looking at how is LAPD and who is LAPD working with, not just in the city, but within themselves, like what gang task force, narcotic task force, who are the task force that are coming in, informants that are basically gathering that data and then turning it over to the city so the city can build the case. And so that's what we're currently mapping out, because I think it is important that we understand not only how is the city using tools to go after certain properties, to have people removed through the various programs, but what is the network and what is the agencies and what are the interdepartmental agencies that LAPD is operationalizing to bring this, you know, to gather this data to make this actually happen. Because LAPD claims to not have anchor points anymore, but they have what's called neighborhood enforcement areas, right? And so, I'm sorry, neighborhood engagement areas. And it's in these areas that they basically look for, you know, what they call prostitution. They look for loitering. They look for abandoned houses. They look for people sleeping in areas, people gathering in areas, anything that has signs of what they call disorder. And so they send in their senior lead officers and basically are looking, you know, to see how can they redevelop that area or actually remove people from those areas. So we're trying to map out really what does the policing of location look like, and how does the policing of location actually work with city agencies to be able to remove people from land.
Thank you. So any questions from anybody about this? So this is something that is very critical. This is, I guess I'm going to pass it on to Jamie. Jamie, you want to talk about social network analysis?
Yeah, so social network analysis was something that we also learned more about when we were doing our own public records requests in regards to Operation Laser, the person and place-based predictive policing program that I've been speaking about. And we found out that LAPD was actually training its officers to learn how to create, like, basically maps like we're seeing that would allow them to build associations amongst people that they were carding in the street, right? So carding known as FI, field interview cards. And so when they would get a field interview card on someone, basically if you were in a group or you were on your own, they would fill out a card on you or anybody that you were gathered with, where you were at that location, you know, what you look like, your name, your date, any amount of information they could put on that card. And what they started to do, and now when we think about algorithms and processing systems like Palantir, and even simple things like Excel spreadsheets, which is what they use to create social network analysis, is they just, you know, fill in all these cards and try to make associations to different people. And actually there's other social network analysis tables or maps where they'll show these little dots that you're seeing on the screen right now, but some dots will be bigger and some dots will be smaller. And the larger ones are ones where there's more people that are intersecting with that certain person. And in this sense, they say that information and goods transfer between this person more often. And so this is how they claim that they're doing it to find, you know, gang and drug and, you know, gun activity. But the thing is that we have to also realize that mapping of our communities down from who we associate with, where our cars are going through automatic license plate readers, but even down to how we feel about policing is kind of the name of the game, a game of LAPD. Everything is becoming about drawing out these associations and kind of being able to datify everything about us in order to, again, just even like as we think about the CNAP program, be able to build those cases when necessary, right? So they have all this information on you and they can build a case on you when they need to.
Great. Thank you. And of course, this is our demands and all of that. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to stop there. I just want to show you a couple more things. But before I go there, I just want to stop and pause here and see if folks have any comments on what you've seen, any questions, anything that pops up, anything new or anything old that folks already knew. Because it's a knowledge exchange session. We're trying to decolonize knowledge, but to also build power together as well. So any comments? All right, cool. So next, I just want to quickly just show you, I mean, like some of the most, well, it is at least extremely absurd things that, let me get to it real quickly. Oh, this is, yeah. So this is I'm going to share a report from which was commissioned by U.S. Senator Tom Coburn called Safety at Any Price, and basically to talk about where all this money is going, And the cover is very interesting as well. And he was a senator from Oklahoma. Of course, another senator, nothing like, just to talk much about, but yet at the same time, because of his own sort of fiscal conservatism, wanted to see where things were going. So they looked at a particular program called the Urban Area Security Initiative, which is a part of a much broader, program where the Department of Homeland Security has given up until now about 45 to 50 billion dollars to local municipalities for emergency preparedness, and within that is a stream of money called the Urban Area Security Initiative, which is right here. So this is the money. So many folks have heard about the DoD, Department of Defense 1033 program, which basically is about departments getting surplus equipment from the military, like tanks and grenade launchers and all and all and all. But this is a lot of people don't know about, which involves direct money, direct cash going to the communities, going to the law enforcement agencies. Now, this report is from end of 2012, and from 2003 till 2012, $35 billion, and now that's almost 10 years ago or 9 years ago. $35 billion had already been given. And within that, over $7.1 billion had been given as a result of the Urban Area Security Initiative program, right? So LAPD is a major recipient of that. Various other agencies are a recipient of that. Here's a list of a lot of different agencies. So in California, in 2012, fiscal year 2003 to 2012, in a matter of 9 years, close to $643 million had been given just to LA and Long Beach. So now if you add another 9 years, they're up to over like $1.5 billion or $1.25 billion monies. New York was given, just in New York City was given $1.4 billion. But here's also where a lot of these things, and I'm just going to quickly scroll, and it's available. You can Google it, safety at any price. That here's what they found was. So this is a grant consultant who's basically telling law enforcement agencies that because you have to submit a grant, you have to submit a proposal. It says, tell them what they want to hear, and you stand a chance of getting a better score. Fear has always been a motivating factor in getting the government to spend its money. So this is where's the money, an introduction to grantsforlawofficer.com. This is a grant writing consultant. And here's also another example of where some of these monies were going. Let me just get to that page. So in November 2000 or whenever it was, in 2012, HALO the DHS organized a counter-terrorism summit in San Diego at a hotel for 5 days, in which the entrance for law enforcement individuals was $1,000 a person, which was paid from federal government's grant money, right? So, and they went there to learn this, that they had organized over there a zombie apocalypse, where they had actors get into and dress up like zombies and kind of recreate a whole zombie apocalypse to learn how they would fight back a zombie apocalypse. This is when people talk about our tax dollars, where's our money's going? When people talk about defunding, when people talk about abolition, when people talk about reinvesting in communities. Here you have now, remember that was 35 billion in 9 years, so another 9 years later, or 8 years later, another 30 billion has gone. So about 65 to 70 billion dollars has gone for activities like this. And this report is very telling. And of course, it's coming from the US Senate itself as to how boys with toys, and that's why the cover is very telling as well, that how interesting this whole thing is. So I wanted to share that when we talk about where our monies are being spent, this is another example of where our money is going. I also want to share with you something else as well. Let me just open up this other piece, and we'll wrap it up in a couple minutes. So this was Shoots. There you go. This was a report. Remember fusion centers we talked about? So this was a report from, again, another subcommittee in the US Senate that basically did an audit of the federal support foreign involvement. And remember, this is like a joint federal and local and state jurisdiction. But the federal government only puts in about 20 to 25% of the monies to run these fusion centers. This is a US Senate report that when the audit came out, this is what the audit had to say. And I'm only going to go through the table of contents, right? That reports from fusion center was often flawed, unrelated to terrorism, had nothing of value, could have violated Privacy Act protections. Terrorism-related reporting was often outdated, duplicative, and uninformative, right? DHS intelligence reporting officials reportedly violated guidelines, faced no sanctions at all, and on and on and on and on and on. So it is incumbent that when we talk about, because there's a lot of glitz and sensationalism. Remember, we talked about that one of our goals is to desensationalize the rhetoric around national security. So this is the bullshit that we find out, that using monies for Chevy Tahoes, using money to pay rent, using money on computers for county medical examiner, using money to get more equipment, on and on and on and on and on. So I think this is what we need to be really looking at, that how does, like when we talk about this whole, you know, because one of the things I think is marketing and PR, that the sensationalism behind agencies and, you know, just are because Hollywood and the Hollywoodization of the federal agencies, the Hollywoodization of the boys and girls in blue, the Hollywoodization. And when it comes down to that, there's so much trash and garbage that absolutely, and one can even argue incompetency or total corruption, total lying. But I think we have to look at it that this is in service to white supremacy. And it absolutely makes sense for them to be engaging these activities, because if we are looking at through the lens of white supremacy, if we are looking at it through the lens of patriarchy, if we are looking at it through the lens of capitalism, if we are looking at it through the lens of settler colonialism, and now increasingly through the lens of scientific objectivity, this is exactly what we are talking about. This is exactly where a lot of our things are going. And that's why it is incumbent upon us to really inform ourselves and to really understand that how deep these BS runs, and why and for us, we are fiercely abolitionist. I mean, even to the extent that we were involved in the people's budgeting process for a couple times, and with a lot of respect and a lot of love, there's things have moved, but does defunding take away the oomph towards abolition? And this has been a political move by the powers to be, by the city councils and all of that, that how they have basically played a hand on us. But before we wrap it up, I'm going to open it up to see if folks have any closing comments. But I just want to have a couple tasks, because as you are here, we want to also ask you to build with us as well. But before we go there, there's a question from Alex, Jamie, that regarding CNAP anchor points, how does LAPD coordinate with LA city officials, real estate to operationalize displacement?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly what our next task is doing, that we are unearthing, because I think we do know that LAPD is needed to, you know, set up narcotics, you know, informants. We know that they are needed to collect data on an area to deem it a nuisance. But what we're trying to figure out and map out is exactly what are the agencies that LAPD is using to bring all that information together? How are they collecting it? How are they identifying areas that they're calling anchor points or neighborhood engagement areas? And then what are the channels that they're using to transfer that information over? What does the cooperability look like? And then the other half, and this is for the housing folks that we're building with, is to really look at what are the relationships between the city and these real estate developers. How are the real estate developers, you know, in some senses bringing in their own closed circuit televisions, bringing in their own surveillance to be able to aid officers or aid the LAPD in essentially criminalizing an area so they can swoop in and either take it, protecting an area so that they can develop that relationship with LAPD so they can turn people in. I think one of the things that Hamid brought up in the beginning of this webinar was about how informants during the rebellions actually had their own video that they're turning over to LAPD. So people who have established areas in their community that they feel people are either hanging out around or they, you know, feel threatened by, and they put up all this surveillance technology, are actually creating relationships with LAPD. So we have to also realize that LAPD in their community policing and their community development is really choosing a type of stakeholder that they are building with, right? And those are the people who they're protecting their property, they're protecting their right to move however they choose to, remove people, whoever they don't want around their areas. So really that web is the current work that we are doing. And so we have our main meeting about that work is the 4th Tuesday of every month, but we have a working group that meets on Mondays, the first Monday and the third Monday of the month, where we're actually starting to develop that out and build with other housing organizers who are actually looking at that side of real estate and land, where we are looking at predominantly building out that map for how exactly that criminalization of that area looks, what it looks like.
Thank you, Jamie. Lastly, I just posted a link in here, and this link is, and definitely Jackie will get to you in one quick second. I just want to present this, and remember we talked about academic complicity. So one of the programs that the LAPD has launched, which was launched 10 years ago, and now they're expanding that, is the Community Safety Partnerships. And they're building it on a report that came out of UCLA Luskin School by two academics, Professor Georgia Leap and Jeff Ranthingam, and which is basically completely a bogus report. Community safety partnerships are a mass surveillance program in housing projects. It started off in 2010 in Jordan Downs and Nickerson Gardens and Ramona Gardens, at least 4 housing projects. What they do is they established neighborhood policing, so basically snitches in the housing projects. They go in and clean out all green spaces, which basically is about, so there's a concept of policing called crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED, which basically requires for them to clean up so they can create a panopticon effect and surveillance. So we are working with some students on who have graduated from Luskin to really call out Luskin School as well, to really call out their complicity into moving something which is going to cause a lot of harm in the long run. And it's very well documented, and it goes after the very report that they're looking to justify. So we are asking for folks to sign on to this thing, because if you're at UCLA, that's fine. If you're an academic, fine, student or something. If you're not, if you're a community member, please sign this and hit submit, and share this with all your networks and friends and family as well, because it's really, really critical that we need to go after the sources who are creating conditions on the ground that lead to mass surveillance and mass policing, particularly of the youth in our communities. So Jackie has a comment. Before we go, I don't have how do we respond to the statement, I'm not doing anything of interest, I don't break the law, so it doesn't matter if they're watching me? And I'm glad you raised that question, Jackie, because that's exactly what we had talked about earlier. And I'm going to pull it up again just to show you, and what Jamie then talked about, like, how the datification of our lives happens. So whether whoever you are, wherever you are, and whether you say that, whoever says that I have nothing to worry about, everything, I mean, almost like in this very weird way, every step you take, every move you make, like everything that you are doing, from the minute, whether you're walking down the street, whether you're talking on the phone, whether you're driving in public, whether you're out in a park with family, whether you're at the beach or somewhere, whether you're doing transactions over your computer, whether you're using a bus card, whether you're using your ATM card, all of that information is being gathered. And in essence, it's what is happening is that your thought is being commodified. So what Jamie was saying about the deaggregation and the reaggregation, so our beings are being recreated for commodification and profit making as well. So on one hand, you know, one can say that, you know, that I have nothing to worry about. Well, then, you know, just you better worry about, because there's a lot of our your kin that are being impacted, particularly in the Black, brown, and poor communities and unhoused communities. And if you don't give a shit about other people, then at least worry about yourself, because you have become basically a source of data broker. Because so your body is a data broker. So we do this exercise when we are there in person, and hopefully one of these days virtually we may do that. We call it what's in your wallet. And what's in your wallet, people kind of open their wallet, and it's just a simple exercise, and start looking at what things are they carrying. And each one of them is a surveillance tool. Each one of them is an information gathering tool. What happens with that information, it may be very benign, but there's always somebody or something or some corporation, because we can't escape the brutality of state capitalism. We can't escape, at least where we are right now. We are living in the most ruthless capitalist system. So even down to, you know, just post-mortem can be commodified as well. So the state by itself has become a major data broker as well, right? So in a sense, these are used for social control, a lot of psychological warfare, just by getting people to be convinced that they don't have to worry about, they're winning the psychological war. Because that is a very clear psychological operation for people to think that I have nothing to worry about, and like, you know, just it's all fine and dandy for me. So I hope that addresses the question, because I think your question is absolutely the most critical question that we should all be asking and bringing it to our communities. So again, with that, please get this form and get folks to sign on to it. But I'm going to just, before we close out, Jamie, any comments? And please, anybody else, any closing comments? What you thought of it? Was this helpful? This is being recorded. It's going to go up on our website. We already have all the 23 webinars on the website that we have done. We have the previous 3 surveillance 101s. A lot of similarity in the conversation, because it's a constant reminder as well. But if folks have any thoughts or any comments. All right, Jamie, you want to quickly talk about the advisory committee piece and what's going on with that?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, like we were saying before, the police commission, you know, based on the rebellions that were happening, the way they responded to the community, basically overwhelmingly calling for the defunding of police, for the removal of monies and put monies into resources that we need. The police commission decided to, and the mayor decided to appoint a special advisory committee, which I believe has 14 members, 12 or 14 members. And, you know, there's basically one person, a minister from a church in South Central, who is not someone who's a lawyer, an academic, or some type of, you know, civil rights expert in policing. And so this advisory commission is going to basically advise the police commission on what is needed in regards to reform, looking at accountability, looking at hiring practices, looking at data collection. So looking at various things in regards to policing. And so what they're doing is they're hosting a series of hearings, basically of community input hearings. But what we're finding out, and we're getting confirmation on this, is that these hearings are going to be opened up to only select community members. So they're inviting only select groups throughout Los Angeles, and there's going to be 5 of them. And each person that in there for 3 hours long, so then each groups that they select will have 10 minutes to speak. And in our inquiry about, you know, who's going to be presenting, what is the formatting, what is this going to be about, we asked about public comment, and they said that the public will not be able to comment. So, so this obviously is another slap in the face, where there's been many things that they have been doing in the name of reform, in the response to, you know, 40,000 people taking the streets, 40,000 plus. And so now they're going to host 5 hearings where the public doesn't get to comment, and they decide who gets to come up and make presentations. So, so stay tuned. We are definitely not going to take this lying down. We're not going to allow them to, you know, completely dismiss the community. So we are going to be having some type of call to action, and that will be coming up in as soon as we get confirmation that they're truly trying to shut out the community. We'll be having petitions, a call-in campaign. We're definitely going to write to the mayor. We're thinking of getting media involved, because when you think about this, this is who they brought in to respond to us, who have taken to the street, who have said that we are done with this police violence, we're done with your reforms. And so here they are, they bring another advisory committee, they bring another reform committee, and now they're completely shutting us out of the process. So, so stay tuned for that.
I've also posted this email address where folks on this call are interested to make a comment. They're asking that you send this email, and they can send you an invite to make a comment. But the deadline is we just got this information yesterday. The deadline is tomorrow. So if folks on this call are interested, of course, it's always like a last minute shit. And then, of course, like, you know, what kind of comment folks make. I mean, our demands are basically to end mass surveillance and dismantle it, not to reform it or change it, but to completely dismantle that. So there's definitely a whole set of demands as well. So if folks are interested, please take this email address and let us know that if you got an invite at our email address is stoplapdspying@gmail.com. I'm going to post that real quick as well. So that's our email address. So please let us know if you're going to be invited, and then we can send you some talking points and things like that. So yeah. Well, cool. So hopefully this was good. This was helpful. Thank you so much. A lot of information, but you know, it's important. Our next webinar, regularly scheduled webinar, is on September 1st, which is a Tuesday. And that's going to be on surveillance and the police state and the intersection of gender and sexuality. Before that, our first Tuesday of August, we had invited comrades from Bogota, Colombia, a group of trans sex workers who use art and theater on the streets to organize against police oppression in Colombia. So hopefully it's going to be, again, a very engaging webinar and a lot of knowledge exchange. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe, be healthy, and we'll see you all out on the streets and on the screen. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.